Hi, John. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
To people watching, thank you very much for tuning in. Before we go a little further ahead and get into it, let me introduce everyone around the screen at this point. On this end, my name is Manasa,
I'm Imran.
and we are two halves of Shall We Travel. We're a travel company based out of India, and we work with wonderful people like Jon Wright, who's the other person across the screen. Hi, John. Thank
Hi.
you for waking up early, very early, and looking your Sunday best. It's about 7:30 a.m. on your end, so we appreciate it.
Yes.
So John and Imran know each other from before. Imran, why did you?
Well, John, first time I met John was in 2019. He came in with a group of architects and designers. I had the pleasure and the opportunity to co-lead a tour with him.
So John primarily is who we're talking to because he's a heritage consultant based out of the UK, and your very particular area of expertise is 20th century architecture. John, why did you tell us a little more about yourself?
No, thank you both. It's lovely to be here. And talking again about the prospect of coming to India is incredibly exciting. And the first tour that we did, had a specific focus on a range of buildings and periods,
Right.
because in some senses, you can't pass through India for the first time, and many of these people who came on the tour were doing that, without looking at the other stuff. But the primary focus was, as you say, Imran, the architecture of the 20th century in India. And yes, as you say, Masa, that is my area of expertise. I work for a major conservation practice in the UK called Purcell Architecture.
Right.
And for them, I specialize in the architectural history and the conservation of 20th century buildings in particular. And of course, relating to the tour, and there are two main phases globally.
Right.
The architecture of the 1920s and 1930s that you'd call interwar architecture here, or perhaps the architecture of the early part of the 20th century. And then there's the post-war,
Right.
what in England would perhaps be termed post-independence architecture,
Right.
which runs from 1945 or so, up until the mid-1970s or early 80s.
Right.
Those are the two primary phases that we three have focused on for this tour.
Yes.
Right.
These architectures in India.
So we intend to sort of rediscover this architectural style across the ages, across India. And we typically start in Delhi, which is home to everything in India. It's the national capital as well. Tell us a little bit about what we'd like to see in Delhi.
I think in Delhi it's the best place to start because you've got a mixture of the two kind of periods, and you've got a great place to start in that narrative that we hope to tell people who come on the tour about India's journey,
Right.
architectural journey through the 20th century. Part of that journey is what is best explained by the colonial architecture of New Delhi,
Absolutely.
and what architects like Edwin Lutyens and Herbert Baker achieved there in setting up a brand new portion of a very ancient city,
Right.
with new aspirations and new kinds of architecture that even for European, in this case UK architects, had a particularly Indian flavour to
Right.
it. That's the best place we could possibly start. Because
Right.
that sets the baseline, gives you the groundwork for everything that comes after, which is in some senses either a continuation, a resistance, or an assertion of national identity when
Right.
you get to post-independence.
Right.
And that's then the threads of the story, really.
Delhi famously is a city that's been rebuilt ground up more than 7 times. The number that floats about is 7. So in that way, I think it's, as you said, very befitting that we begin in Delhi and build our way through, in a manner to speak, across India. I think one of the other locations on the itinerary is...
Yeah, Chandigarh and then Bombay.
Right.
Yeah.
So do tell us what that transition in terms of the architectural style might be in what we would see.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we'll pick up the threads of this post-independent architecture, the architecture of 1945 to this in the mid 1970s or so in Delhi. So what Delhi will give you is a grounding of the wider narrative that we'll discuss in the other cities. It isn't strictly chronological, so it's important to get that grounding first, because the next place we go after Delhi, which is geographically kind of closest, is Chandigarh.
Yes.
And Chandigarh was a planned modern city by the hugely influential architect Le Corbusier, working with other British architects, Max Boffron and Jane Drew in particular, also his cousin Pierre Jon Wright,
Right.
who designed a house there. And what Le Corbusier achieves in Chandigarh is this sort of an evocation of his career-long thinking about how you could plan a city from scratch.
Right.
And he's rare among architects to have got that chance. One could compare it to what Auguste Perret achieved in Le Havre, for example, post-war in France.
Right.
But this is on a much bigger
scale.
Okay.
monumental scale
Right.
in Chandigarh. It is a World Heritage Site for what he achieved there. And so this pivotal figure in the way in which modern architecture spread around the world, you get the chance to see how he did that.
Right.
The buildings are spectacular pieces of work, which were almost handcrafted by armies of Indian labourers post-independence to present this idea of a new India.
Right.
So it's wrapped up with the national identity as well. That's an important place to go, because it is he more than anybody else who then sets the tone for
Right.
the Indian architects that follow, working in a modern
Right.
typology.
He set an example, and then the Indian architects kind of took it up from there and went on to create a lot more buildings across India, I would say.
I think this is an interesting place to also think about where India figures on the architectural map in the world. And I guess there's also a sense that the architecture in India, the modern architecture in India, is somewhat underrated. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's the case? And why is it important for us to be going through these and taking other architects along? I think we'd like to speak to why we think this is a great tour for people to come and discover India in a very different way.
In response to your first point, I think there's no doubt, perhaps unfortunately, that India hasn't. I think the big stuff has been recognised. I mentioned the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Chandigarh, yeah, and there are other pieces of the Corbusier's work in Ahmedabad and dotted around that are important and are recognised. The same could be said of Louis Kahn, an American architect who also works in India extensively. But what's not been recognised or fully kind of understood, perhaps, is the contribution to the global modern story in architecture of the Indian architects who followed. And I think that's a kind of thread of this tour, which is significant. And some of that work is very, very good and should be better known. So it's kind of twin. I mean, I think some of that stuff is well known, but the wider story of Indians' contribution to modernism globally isn't perhaps so well known.
Right.
There are multiple reasons for that. It hasn't been perhaps appreciated in the same way from a conservation perspective, although many have tried to get kind of more recognition for it. The heritage protection in India has not necessarily responded to that period of architecture yet. In a way, I think there's a parallel with the British experience here.
Right.
In that we're both countries with very long architectural histories, and what architectural history is to both of us goes back a long way, and it's easy to appreciate the early stuff. But the danger is you sort of overlook that which is 100 years ago while you concentrate on that which is 1,000 years old, and that's a shame, because you can lose that stuff in the interim, and when a building's gone, it's gone.
Not
Gone, yeah.
And that has happened in most of our countries, I'm afraid to say, with this period of architecture. So yes, more recognition for these buildings is a thread of this, I think, a wider understanding of what India's contribution was.
I think there's also a lot to be said about the social context of this. The way we're sort of also looking at it on the tour is we kind of go to Mumbai and Hyderabad, and we're looking at the Art Deco style of architecture as well, which is, John, you've mentioned that Miami, of course, is where people would flock, but Bombay is also very much at par in a certain regard.
There's a parallel that the tour will sort of flesh out, but the idea that modernism was a global architecture for both its main phases. Of course, when Le Corbusier and others developed the style in the 1920s, it's called the international style.
Right.
And the reason for that, it was put forward as an architecture that could be transferable to anywhere on Earth.
Right.
And that it was an architecture for a modern, global, kind of culture. But, individual nations did their own things with it, which is right and proper, and that's the way it developed. So you get these architectures which express, themes, the decorative motifs, symbolism, which is entirely entwined with national or even local or regional identity.
Right.
And you get that again post-independence. So you get a group of Indian architects, like you say, Imran, not follow, but they come after the Corbusier, and they pick up the threads of like modernism, but they make it specifically Indian. They do that by either bringing in, themes or motifs or ideas from earlier architectures,
Right.
or by developing in their own idiosyncratic kind of styles. People like Rajarul, who you mentioned, and Doshi in particular, who works in the office of Louis Kahn and then develops his own very particular style.
I would want to ask what the both of you are most excited about for the upcoming tour. I think we'll start with Imran.
I'm excited that John's going to come to India again and we're going to be able to do the tour together. The fact that I'm going to be able to see a little more in the art space that I like, which is Art Deco, the architectural style that I really fallen in love with, and also that I'll be able to showcase everyone who's coming onto the tour to be able to see what kind of food you get in India, the different kind of cultures that you start from Delhi and you end in Hyderabad, and that kaleidoscope of cultures that you'll be able to see is going to be just icing on the cake for me. Yeah.
John, would we be right in thinking that these social elements of how a region is influenced culinarily and culturally is what gets reflected in the architecture we're looking at? And then also tell us what you're excited about.
I think it is reflected, and I think the regional characteristics are something you could never impart unless you come to India and have a look for yourself. Right. To stand in front or in buildings is the most important way to experience architecture and what the architect or the designer was trying to achieve. And of course, you bring with you all the things that you're collecting on your tour about the culture you're in, about the history you're learning, about the food you're eating, the sights and sounds of places are sort of part of the experience. But still, the standing in front of those buildings that the Corbusier designed in Chandigarh is going to be the highlight for me. That is and will always remain one of the world's great architectural experiences. The buildings are monumental and they are evocative of a range of different things, but they speak so powerfully of what India set out to do post-independence. So there's that experience, which I can't wait to have again, because it is, an awesome moment when you finally get to the middle of that square and you see what he's achieved. The second thing, I echo Imran's voice about Hyderabad, because Hyderabad is not on the global tick list of Art Deco sites at the moment.
Right.
And I think it might have a claim to be there.
Right.
and we will find out. Because what I've seen suggests a very rich and diverse and completely separate flowering of Art Deco that is not widely known. So, I'm really excited about that too, because I haven't seen any of those buildings.
Because that is essentially what we're proposing and want people to come and do on the store. Come and really soak in the experience of what you know, what you've not seen before, and the context that all of this exists in, which, like you said, is very academic for many people largely, but to really get it off the page and be there in person is a completely different feeling and experience.
It was quite a sight for me when the entire tour in the 2019 tour, the entire group was standing in the Capitol complex and they were staring at these structures. It's concrete, right? It's a roof, it's a concrete, it's walls. But that's what I thought. But when I saw the childlike wonder, that sparkle in the eye when they would touch the wall or they would look at a color or they would look at a building,
Right.
I understood what, maybe not in its entirety, but I understood what it meant and how it must have felt for them to be standing there. It must have been excellent. It must have been a feeling that I cannot put into words. So yeah, I still remember that little sparkle in all your eyes, like 30 people that were there.
It's what you bring with you, isn't
right.
it, as well, when you travel. People who know or appreciate, Le Corbusier's work, that's number one. You can go and see his other buildings and villas, but that is the place you want to go and stand if you appreciate his buildings.
Right.
And I think you'll understand a lot about not just his work, but the huge effort from all the Indian laborers who worked on it. Because really, and the reason people were getting close, Imran, is that they are monumental buildings that were effectively handcrafted.
Yeah.
And that's an extraordinary thing, it's just sort of akin to the pyramids or something, so there is that. But I think one of the most important things that comes out of the fusion of we three doing this is that there's some contextual and architectural information coming from me, but there's an Indian perspective, contemporary Indian perspective coming from you, and those two things, really serve to kind of deepen and enrich the experience of the people who are on the tour. I think that's what's the primary thing that we're offering collectively, I think.
Right.
And you don't want to overload the academic stuff at the expense of that experience, which, as you say, is almost kind of it's sort of untouchable. You can't quite explain it, but it's partly what you bring with you, and I think a lot of people who really enjoy this tour will know a little bit about the Corbusier before they come. And
Right.
that's why all those people are standing there going,
Yeah.
The perspective is also where the idea is to also enhance it by having local experts on in every location that we're going to be at. So you're not just hearing one idea and one concept from us, but it's also someone who's from the Indian architectural space telling us more about, sort of rounding out the overall conversation. So that is also something that I'm quite keen on and quite excited to see how that comes together.
so we'll have one in every place, won't we?
Yes.
And I come in with the cultural flair to it.
No doubt.
So with that, I think I'd like to sort of thank you and close this out. Anyone who has more questions or more curiosity about this, I invite you to come stare at buildings with us, with John, with Imran and myself, with Shall We Travel. And thank you.
I just can't wait to come and share, the amazing histories of these buildings with people on the tour, and to see them again myself. It's going to be amazing.
True.
Shall we?